In 2011, he was but a Democratic Alliance spokesperson. Today, 15 years later, he's part of a centrist collective of opposition political parties preparing to shake up how our metros are governed later this year.
Let's come together and work, because what we need in South Africa are pragmatic policies.
Build One South Africa Member of Parliament Dr. Mmusi Maimane reflects on his time as DA leader.
It was the most toxic, vile politics I'd ever lived through.
His critical work now as chair of Parliament's Appropriations Committee.
All the parties that are in the GNU, there's not a single thing I can look at the budget and say, well, I think that reflects this party's policy.
And where to from here, really?
The wall speaks to notionally this idea of separate development.
Maimane is my special guest this Newsmaker Thursday, right here on The Lead on News 24 and wherever you get your podcasts.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
In Roby's Pointless Braai Quiz today, who's the ANC NEC member who's been wrapped over the knuckles by the party this week for handing out loaves of bread to people in Pretoria this election season? I'll be more than chuffed to name and shame at the end of this show. My name's Graham Robenheimer, this is The Lead, and this is The South African Story. Moving to our top story today, while we met when he was first appointed the spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance back in 2011. And I was just a junior journalist at the time. Today he's the leader of the Build One South Africa movement. And of course, he's an esteemed member of Parliament. And, well, I'm the host of News 24's flagship podcast, The Lead. He's, of course, Dr. Mmusi Maimane. And he's live with me now in our Cape Town studios over lunch. Mmusi, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Ndiabulela, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to be with you, and certainly looking forward to our conversation today.
Okay, we can't chat too long because I know that you've got to rush off to Parliament, to the National Assembly, or where is it sitting now in the Dome, because we know that President Cyril Ramaphosa is answering questions. He only does it 4 times a year. And in actual fact, you recently wrote to the Speaker saying that's just not enough.
It certainly isn't. I think, one of the things that we've got to be thinking of as South Africans is this democracy that we inherited. It has served us well up to this point. What do we do about it for the future? And the reality of it is that perhaps when you were drafting in 94, the world didn't move so fast. Today, you could wake up in the morning to 15% tariff hikes, in the afternoon to 30, and to 50 by the following day, which means the job then of the president is such that it is immediate, it is intentional, and it needs to have quick responses. So having the president literally for about 10 hours a year in a country with economic crisis, crime, all of that simply is not good enough. Other jurisdictions all over the world, I certainly think when I think about the UK, they have it once a week. When I think about President Trump, whether you like President Trump or not, he's present before the media, is offering a briefing at the White House. And so you could always get direct questions. Our president, you only really see him at SONA or at these such events. So I certainly think we can increase that. I would argue that on the immediate, let's at least double it. Let the president come monthly, at least at a start, keeping in mind that the president has almost preset questions that go before him. Let's increase our ability to be able, for the president to be able to say, today we're going to talk about the economy, so that we can ask questions that are pointed on that issue, so that you allow the vision, the sense of what the president is wanting to do, to be accountable. And then the last thing I'd say is, naturally, I've been advancing for a long period of time that there needs to be a direct election of the president. And the reason I say that is because at this point in time, the only people the president fears are his own political comrades. He doesn't fear the people. He or she won't fear the people. Doesn't fear Parliament in that sense, because if he keeps a cabinet large enough and the party's in place, no one's going to vote him out. And I'm not saying you want to vote out for the sake of it, but I just certainly think that we could free the president of the attachment of parties by allowing the direct election to take place, so that he fears the people ahead of the party.
And let me just add that the Fourth Estate journalists, like myself, are also just as frustrated about the fact that we also want to question the president. We also want to bring pertinent questions to his front door and ask him about, highly critical things that are happening in South Africa today. And we also feel aggrieved that we're not getting enough of an opportunity to do so outside of the constructs of Parliament. Yeah. You also recently called for a debate on the dire conflict unfolding in Southwest Asia. I don't use the other term anymore because I feel like we need to decolonize that term. But for people who don't know, I'm going to use it for the respects of perhaps people not affair with the term, but the Middle East. Yeah. Why is that topic, do you feel, so critical within the South African construct of Parliament looking at things? Is it because the ANC has such a tight grip on diplomatic affairs and how South Africa carries itself on the world stage?
Yeah, I think our history of foreign policy has not always been exceptional, because when President Mandela declared our foreign policy, it said it must be based on human rights and it must be based on trade. On the human rights conversation, we have to ask ourselves some legitimate questions. Do we think a nation like Iran upholds human rights, it protects women, it does all of those things? If it doesn't, why are we siding with it? That should be the question, because if our foreign policy is guided by that, then we should uphold it. The second is the question of trade. Now, when you think about trade, already today there's significant reporting about some of the trade routes being closed. It's important that for a citizen who's living in South Africa, in a world that is fast becoming, if you like, flat, in that everything that is international is now domesticated, and what is domestic is international, in that, we are dependent on supply chains. Many South Africans have got family members living in the region, affected by whether they'll be able to come home or not, or are they safe.
Yeah, 100%.
Parliament itself and the executive needs to be able to, in a time of crisis, communicate consistently, accurately, and almost over-communicate. Hiding behind the shadows when people are, my wife the other day was sitting with her sister who is out in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. In fact, as they were talking, here's a young woman, a mother of 3 children, looking outside her window going, I'm watching missiles flying all around here. I'm scared. Now she needs to hear from her government what would need to happen should she need to be brought back to South Africa.
Well, there is a criticism that, sorry to interject, Mmusi, but there is this criticism that international relations, or DIRCO, weren't urgent enough in those early days once everything popped off in Iran. So there is that criticism that exists online.
And it's legitimate, because in darkness, the fear is exaggerated. And ultimately, we needed to secure our citizens, be intentional. But also, it's about reasserting our foreign policy. Prime Minister Carney delivered a very significant speech at Davos when he spoke about the middle-income countries, or middle powers. And I thought that was a very poignant moment, because it asked the question that, as Kwame Nkrumah asked it so long ago, that we should not look east or west, and by definition saying we don't, America or China, but we look forward, we look into Africa, we look to these middle-income countries, we look to the, if you like, the non-aligned movement, the people in the world who are sitting together saying, how do we, in a world, focus on our own interests, ensure that we uphold human rights, and in these conflicts, be very intentional about how we secure our citizens. And in that instance, non-alignment must be that. You can't, in the midst of a conflict, whether it's Russia or Ukraine, wake up in the morning and say, we are non-aligned, but actually we stand with Russia. Or we are non-aligned, therefore we stand with Iran. Or we are non-aligned, or we stand with these ones. But you've got to be intentional about that. And then lastly, you've got to be thinking about your own objectives. And part of our objectives is that we have an economy that's growing at less than 1% on average in the last 10 years. We have a high unemployment crisis. And one of our largest trading partners is the US. And the absence of a diplomat there, the absence of at least a deal,
still no ambassador,
or envoys, is in fact an exacerbating factor. You may not agree with a country on its own actions. There are certain actions that the US has taken that I don't agree with. But in all reality, I've got to say to myself, in the interests of what others project is just over 500,000 jobs, what do I do with the US? How do I position myself as upholder of human rights, upholder of multilateralism, which is no country can act unilaterally without being in consultation with strong institutions, but also enhancing trade not only with the US, with our EU partners, with Africa, with a country like India in the BRICS group, because India is showing growths now that are sitting at about 7%. How do we... South Africa must get back to doing the basics in international relations of saying, what is South Africa's interests? How do we uphold human rights in the world? We lose both those things. I think we'll find ourselves, our foreign policy, being defined as archaic and an ANC purview of aligning itself not only with modern South Africa or 2026 South Africa, but a South Africa that has long stopped existing. And alliances will be historically linked to the ANC with liberation movements and ignorant of current realities and what future generations want.
100%. And on that note, there's a man across the border. He's called the Crocodile, Emmerson Mnangagwa.
Yeah, boy.
And of course, we know the reports that ZANU-PF is the ruling party, the counter to the ANC in that particular country called Zimbabwe, now wants to extend the constitutional mandate for Emmerson Mnangagwa, the president, to hold that presidency until the year 2030. And of course, we're seeing the public rise up again and shades of that public dissent again being suppressed, as we saw during the Mugabe era. You've been very vocal about this.
Absolutely. Because given the sharing of borders, certainly between Zimbabwe, Zambia, Lesotho, countries in SADC, Botswana, it means the issues of Zimbabwe are South Africa's issues. So silence here is not golden. It might be black, green and gold, but it's certainly not helpful in dealing with this particular issue. Because when there's instability in the region, South Africa is the largest, it's the most sophisticated economy, and I'm afraid this quiet diplomacy has not served us well. And therefore, when people expropriate elections without compensation, if you like, they win an election, they take the constitution and rip it apart and insist now they can extend term limits in the middle of that, I think that is violating of the laws of their own country, and South Africa cannot be silent. We need to stand up there, because I often make it simple for people. I say to them, if you think there's a leak in your house and water is coming in, you don't start by picking up the mop. You go and find out where the source of the leak is and shut it down and close the tap. If there's a problem in Zimbabwe and you think we have an immigration problem, if that's your position, well, don't pick up the mop and suddenly start to talk about Abahambe and all of that. Go into and make sure democratic principles are upheld in Zimbabwe. Now, I've been working, I now chair and president of African Alliance that deals with democracy and progress, that already has within it, will soon have well over 40 political parties in now what is potentially 20 odd countries, including the SADC ones, it'll be 25 countries, which will mean it will grow in Africa. Because here's what we believe. We want to support opposition. We want democracy to thrive. We want to build democrats. We want to build leadership in Africa, because as we now see, we are all in some way or another more integrated than we've ever been before. So it is possible, Graham. My kids, your kids, will go to school and be taught by a citizen who comes from another country. Now, whether that citizen comes from America or comes from Australia or Zimbabwe, doesn't matter. What matters is I must make sure that legality is upheld and that there's institutional and democratic principles being upheld. And so I just find it, for me, disturbing that our government would sit on its hands when a country is amending its own constitution and will act against its own citizens.
But what aboutisms? I don't like this in South Africa. What about this? What about that?
Yeah.
And a News 24 reader came out and said, in the context of the Zimbabwe story, and not necessarily because you were vocal about it, but said, quote unquote, and our parliament wants to debate the Iran war while human rights abuses happen in their next door neighbor's country. But I suppose this kind of violence and repression is acceptable in Africa these days, and our parliament wants to debate the Iran war while human rights abuses happen next door. A bit of a whataboutism, because two things can happen at the same time. But I just thought I'd give you the chance to answer that.
And I think it's a fair point to make. But I think, it's a bit like the crisis that is taking place currently is urgent and immediate, and I get that. And therefore the urgency of the debate. It doesn't nullify the fact that Zimbabwe has been in crisis effectively since 2007. You'll remember there were the original government of national unity, which others would sit back and say in 2007, when the opposition led by Morgan Tsvangirai had effectively won an election, and we said, no, let's find a way of negotiating election results. At that point, the opposition should have taken over both the prime minister and the presidency. And the net effect of that is that part of the subsequent underlying agreement was the opening of our borders, which has created another problem. But it's been going on since then that we've seen coups that have taken place. I do not like President Mugabe, not because of his role as a liberator in that country, if you want to deem it that, but I thought towards the end, he fell prey of what the Kenyans say. At first, we must be liberated, and then we must liberate ourselves from the liberators.
Yeah.
And Mugabe at the point became an oppressor, effectively. So now at that point, but still, an illegal military coup took place there, where the commander of the army was no longer the president. It was someone else. That was wrong. Now you come today to Emerson Mnangagwa, who doesn't have a history of defending human rights, who clearly there are some deliberate undermining of opposition. There have been issues where state-sponsored violence is taking place. We can't sit down. We can't keep quiet. But this, as you know, when the president has gone to interact with his counterpart there.
There's a picture of them on the couch at the AU summit.
I've been very intentional to say the AU and our president needs to take a lead on this issue. I think there's always this debate that takes place. It's this idea of sovereignty. No, let each country do what it wants to do. Don't come and tell your neighbors how to run things. In this instance, we are so intertwined economically and many other variables that silence is not golden. We have to think about how in a multilateral institutions like SADC, etc., must intervene. Because when the president of Zambia stands up and says the elections in Zimbabwe were not free and fair, why do we ignore it and then attend that inauguration as if it makes sense? When in Malawi, the same issue was occurring of election rigging, we keep quiet. Yet in Botswana, when the report says, no, the elections were free and fair and the president is elected in Dumaboko, our president doesn't go there. To me, you are either a Democrat or you are a dictator. But if you're a Democrat, best you be willing to stick out and fight for democracy to be upheld and the institutions which South Africa has got a significant impact over. We must use our power, both hard and soft power. I'm not talking militarily, but the customs union and institutions like that, we have power. Let's use it.
Okay, let's talk things a little bit more within our own borders. Up until this point, lead listeners are hankering for a couple of questions I know for you to answer. You stirred the pot a little bit in Parliament. I see you, Mmusi. You know exactly how to work Parliament. And you asked a very strategic question to the acting police minister, Mr. Feroz Kachaliya, recently. And you said, what is your opinion about the fact that the DA-led City of Cape Town under the current mayor, for now at least, Jordan Hill-Lewis, would like to erect this very controversial wall to the tune of around 114 million rand, just on the outskirts of Cape Town International Airport, where there have been numerous incidents reportedly of smash and grabs et al. And the minister sort of responded saying, it might have limited use, the construction of a wall, but it cannot replace, good detectives, good police resources on the ground. Now, the problem, obviously, with that in the context of the Madlanga Commission is we all left wanting as South Africans for better policing in South Africa today. So it's quite an interesting debate, and I'd love to hear your view on whether you think that wall is necessary or not, especially being the chair of Parliament's Appropriations Committee where money is handled very intricately.
Yeah, of course. I think the wall speaks to notionally this idea of separate development. You are saying to some people, you live here, let the crooks live with you, and we will put a wall and keep you in there. And so now I have to ask the basic questions. Will the wall have access control? Who's allowed in? Who's allowed out? On what basis do we make that? And so to me, you can't build one South Africa and then wake up tomorrow and say, but what we are going to do, because we've got a crime problem, we are going to fence in the following communities. It is wrong there. It would be wrong in any other place in South Africa if someone went out and said, we're going to lock ourselves in. I think it doesn't speak to how, in a globalized environment, we approach fighting crime. Actually, fighting crime begins first and foremost with shared values. Because it's not about, when we talk about shared values, you and I are of different races. Doesn't change the fact that we want to care about each other. We share common humanity. I don't want to see harm done to you. You don't want to see harm done to me.
I'd agree to that, yeah.
So we need to establish values. And when you think about Scandinavian countries, the reason why Scandinavian countries are relatively safe is because they have shared values. It's what people like Soren Kierkegaard and so many others infused into society and fought for that. So we have to do that. The second issue is, and I agree with the acting Minister of Police, actually rather than spending 160 odd million rand building a wall, why don't you hire more detectives and deploy them into communities where you see crimes are hotspots? We need to reform the way we are policing.
But then the counter to that would be, if I may play devil's advocate,
Yeah, sure.
would be that, the DA will go, we need more powers. We need the devolution of police powers to beef up our metro police.
They can have that. They can have that. Because decentralization of police is not a policy position I disagree with. I actually think that rather than sending the army as an argument, were you to devolve and say where there's capability, we're going to decentralize, we're going to bring intelligence closer to the ground because communities in fact know in certain instances where the criminals are. We're going to capacitate police stations like Nyanga because we know that the ratio of police to citizen there is still fairly low. In my community in Dobsonville, where I grew up, the ratio of police is 1 to 1,200. So we want to internationally benchmark it to 1 to 300. And then furthermore, then say to ourselves, given that we're going to amend the Metro Police Act to give them investigatory powers so that the Metro Police aren't stuck asking me for whether my license disc is up to scratch or not and whether my tires work whilst there's a murder problem, that you then engage that and you increase the force. And then thirdly, you seek ways to partner with private security so that you are able to increase visibility in communities. To me, when you do that, you are reforming in a sustainable manner. Because what is the destination for a criminal? The destination for a criminal, if you genuinely believe, is the correctional service. Well, let's think about the steps leading towards that. A competent detective must arrest them. We must make sure that the courts do the job that they have to do, and they must end up in jail. How is a war going to help eliminate that? The issue in South Africa is that we don't have more criminals. It's a myth. What we have in South Africa is the same people who commit crime being able to repeat it over and over again and get away with it. And so if we knew we had the top 500 crooks in Cape Town, let's go find them. Because I promise you that will have much bigger effect than us sitting around kind of deploying armies and playing around with walls. I just think it's insanity looking for good results, and it doesn't work. Let me say this. In 2010, we saw a decline in murder rates in countries. What was the secret behind that? We did so because we capacitated police, we increased police visibility, and ensured that actually the crooks ended up behind bars. If it worked in 2010, we can do it again now. Surely the secret here is about visibility and increasing of manpower and giving powers so that we can investigate and lock up criminals rather than trying to lock up communities.
Okay, I'm going to blindside you a little bit here.
Yeah, sure.
What do you think about this idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy that Jordan Hill-Lewis will be the next leader of the Democratic Alliance? And we're going to get to Bosa policies, and we're going to get to speak a little bit more about Bosa soon. I want to get this sort of little elephant out of the room as part of your political legacy. Your view, because you told me last week on this very show, on this very platform, he had a great rapport with you until...
we worked together.
Do you think he'll be the next DA leader?
Of course he's going to be the next DA leader. Is anointed leader.
Were you anointed?
That's a debate for another day. What I think must happen, I'm agnostic about whether he or anybody in the DA must lead the DA. The organizing question for South Africa must be this. Whoever leads the DA, I would hope, would think about it in a progressive sense, would think about it as a party that must be incorporating of all South Africans, would make sure that they are willing to genuinely engage other political parties in a sensible manner. Because the organizing question for South Africa is that who's going to be the government in 2029? Now, if that is then the organizing question, surely political parties must be able to provide leadership that wants to solve problems for all South Africans, not some South Africans.
But Jordan claims that he would like to see more black voters, more black support for the DA. And it's the same thing, obviously, as the very first black leader of the Democratic Alliance that you wanted to see in your time as well.
And we started when I was there to see more of it. Until when we lost the Afrikaans voters who then went to the Freedom Front Plus,
the right-wing side of things.
And people started to say, well, we're losing Afrikaners, let's go back to becoming the English version of the Freedom Front Plus. And so I just thought that was not strategically the route I want to go. And I would argue that there's been so much of that. I have no problem with Jordan. I have no problem with the DA as it happens. I really, really do not. I want to make this crystal clear. I think the DA is a significant part of South Africa. It will continue to be so. Now, what we have to figure out is how do we build a coalition that positions an alternative for South Africa? Because here's the question. Surely the choice that we confront as South Africa should not be, okay, we either have a DA or ANC DA coalition called the GNU, or the ANC EFF MK coalition, whatever they want to call it. That's not a choice. In those scenarios, the ANC is still in charge, as is evidence today. What we need desperately is an alternative. And that's what I'm trying to build at the moment, is to build centrist organizations who say, let's come together and work, because what we need in South Africa are pragmatic policies that are rooted in evidence, that say they are centrist by orientation, to charter a way forward for all citizens. And I'm not convinced that in the current framework of parties, all of that exists. Otherwise, I must join it. And if the DA wants to work with people in the future, it perhaps needs to think about how it incorporates and has a better dialogue.
Context, lead listeners, it's the Unite for Change movement that, of course, Bosa has thrown its hat into the ring with the Good Party, led by Patricia de Lille, also a former DA leader within her own right, although she's held many hats over the years. And then, of course, Rise Mzansi as well, which is looking for a centrist, liberalized way of politics in South Africa today. But here's my question, because I had this conversation with Jan Gerber, our senior parliamentary correspondent, and we both spoke about this late last night. And I want to put this question to you. What is the ballot paper going to look like once the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister gives us the election date? Will it say Unite for Change and you put a mark there, or is it going to say Good Rise Mzansi? So it's going to say Unite for Change.
Yeah, this is not a multi-party charter. This is saying we put, if you like, the collective eggs in the Unite for Change.
That's basket. Risky politically, eh?
It's important because the IEC reports yesterday that there are now 504 political parties registered for elections. Are there 504 problems in South Africa?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Let's be honest. There aren't 504 problems in South Africa, and problems are not going to be solved by having 504 options. For me, the animating thing is, anytime you work with people, of course you are at risk. And of course, it's hard work. I'm not going to be Pollyanna-ish about that. It comes with making compromises. But I think for you as a citizen, aren't you sick and tired of just so many political parties? Aren't you tired of really not being able... You know, I was always amazed when I sometimes hear people say to me, the DA must join the GNU because it will tell the ANC what to do. I'm like, that is tantamount to me joining a particular church and telling them, no, your faith on this thing is wrong.
Yeah.
Or joining the Catholic Church and saying, I think your belief on Mary is wrong. Let me change it. It doesn't work like that.
No. And we've seen that.
And it hasn't worked. Yeah. In fact, when I chair the budget, as you correctly say, let me make this categoric point. All the parties that are in the GNU, there's not a single thing I can look at the budget and say, well, I think that reflects this party's policy. It is a continuation of ANC policy. Full stop. Show me otherwise.
Sure.
So with that in mind, the Republicans say it best: if you losers don't legislate, let's figure out how to win an election and let's all get together and legislate for change. Because it's not who governs South Africa, it's how South Africa is governed. So we need that kind of change. We need that sort of thing. And so what I'm trying to allude to just put a bow on the DA question, is that with the numbers that they have, and one of the things I did, as you know, when we built the government in Johannesburg, we were able to see we had a different mayor, we had a DA mayor, kept it stable for all of those years. And that probably, as you began to see some of the progress that's taking place there. Now, that's all been undermined because suddenly you've got like flip-flopping by multiple parties, etc. Again, we have a job to do to say what citizens want to see is to go, you failed us on water, you failed us on energy, here's how we elect a new government. Not you failed us on water, you failed us on the economy, you failed us on energy, but how do we help you govern more, which is what this GNU is doing. So I'm really intentional about going, let us come back to a place where we build that new alternative for 2029.
Sure.
And whatever the DA does, it can choose to be a part of that conversation or forever saying to itself, we will play second fiddle to the ANC.
May I ask you this question, because I remember covering the press conference and I saw it all that time ago. You announced your resignation from the and we'll move on from DA stuff after this because we're running out of time and there's other important things we can get to. I don't want us to sit here and pithy past things. But I wanted to get your view here, Mmusi. Please indulge me. What went through your head when you announced your resignation and here's Helen Zille behind you looking forlorn? And I remember seeing your face and you looked tired and you looked a little bit, dare I say, haggard. And you were like a little bit hurtful, actually. What really went through your mind at that point of like, okay, this is it. It's done now?
It was a very difficult time in my life. It had a build-up, you will remember. There were multiple campaigns of people saying things about me in public that weren't true. Many of them mobilized by people inside the organization. It was the most toxic, vile politics I'd ever lived through. So by the time you arrive at that press conference, you are in a state of such profound, I'm very cautious to use the word trauma, but really, I'd lived through a most toxic space I'd ever seen. And I know whilst people say they asked me to stay, but how do you stay in a place that is seeking to destroy you, your family, everything that you do? There was no ways you would be able to sit through all of that. That was on the first. The second was, I knew at the time that, we needed to build something that ultimately could talk to these values that I so firmly believe in, that I felt at the time were being so firmly rejected. You will recall, I fought hard for the clause of diversity to be included in the DA's constitution. And when I think about so many people who opposed that thing, so many people opposed it. We had to work hard in Congress to oppose just the idea of diversity. Just think about that. Not. Of course, you can link it with a debate about DEI, etc. That wasn't issue. What I reject notionally is political parties who eventually become parties of particular races. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with this idea that you can be an English party, a Afrikaans party, a Zulu party, a Tswana party. I think what you then end up achieving is demography being destiny. You end up with, let's just take the census and then say, okay, here are the election results.
Yeah.
That's not South Africa. We must wake up, at least I would hope for my kids, we must get to a point where it is possible for a white South African to represent their interests in the same way as a black South African will. It must be possible that we must live in a country, as Steve Biko so aptly put it, that there should be no minorities or majorities. There should just be a people. And to achieve that, it must be made possible. So now for me, that moment probably I needed to get away. I needed to also give myself time to sharpen my own beliefs about the world, about how we want to see the next phase of South Africa. I went and did a PhD.
I wanted to ask you, congratulations on getting a PhD, and I mean that wholeheartedly. It's a huge achievement. It was 2022, right? University of Joburg?
I started in Joburg, and I graduated in 2024. And
alongside Mmusi Maimane.
As it happens, I didn't even know he was studying until I saw his name on the list. But what I think is important to reflect on is that when people rewrite history and make farcical statements like he left the party in a bad state, it's absolute hogwash. You will remember at the time we'd gone through an election, which, by the way, subsequent leaders have gone less votes. So I don't know what status you can leave the things in. Secondly, we were running a review panel in order to position the party for the future. And thirdly, I would argue at the time, I'm not sure, and I can't speak about the DA's finances, but I want to be clear that as leader, I'd raised financial support for the DA that had helped it fight multiple elections.
Yeah, it's not often you hear that being touted, right?
And that's an important job of the leader. You are the face of the organization. And so people back you financially, they back you by their votes, they do all of that kind of work. And more than anything, just because we have a difference of opinion and a difference of views about how the world is, does not mean you are thinking and I am not. It means we are both thinking and we just differ on this issue. So I think it is farcical and wrong. And then also to secretly pontificate on polling that you've done that you can't produce publicly, for me is wrong. What the job that we've got to do now is to say history cannot be sacrificed at the altar of a few individuals. What we need is to be able to have a frank discussion about what the future of the country must look like so that we build this alternative. We fail at that job, I can assure you. You mentioned Zimbabwe earlier on. I want to point to another country. Let me think, Namibia. SWAPO has been in power there. You know, one of the countries I enjoy the most is Botswana. They built this united UDC. They brought it together.
Yeah.
They didn't all agree on many things, but they did a pre-election pact coalition. Now they have Dumaboko as the president, having brought change and end of liberation era politics. So this is not about a moment where I must sit here and say, this one is right, that one is wrong, Helen, this one. We must shut out that conversation and focus on the future of this country, because actually that must be at the center. So whoever leads the DI, I wish them well. Let them come to the table to build the South Africa we want to build.
And I don't mean to hover too much onto that, because I think that probably does irritate you a little bit, that you have to sometimes speak about the legacy. But you may also argue that a lot more people know of Mmusi today because of that chapter of his life to a certain degree. One may argue. But let me ask you this. Build One South Africa movement. It's got some very interesting policy proposals that other parties aren't necessarily thinking up. And which towns and cities and provinces is the Unite for Change movement like really honing in for in the upcoming municipal polls? I like to believe that the local government elections are the most critical over and above the national elections. Is it the Western Cape? Is it Gauteng? Is it all?
I mean, the big metros are where it matters. Joburg and Cape Town are going to be the big players. It matters because if you think about this election is a referendum on Joburg. Joburg has been on full display in terms of, we've had many mayors. The joke in Joburg is that if you don't like this one, just wait 3 months. It's a referendum because Joburgers don't have water. They're sitting at home sometimes. You know, the other joke in Joburg is that water, electricity, and data are multiple choice questions. You can't have all three at the same time. You can have one or the other. So now is a moment where we've got to contest hard in Joburg. We've got to contest hard in Cape Town. There are a number of other metros that we're looking at on the back of strong candidates, strong support for not only candidates for mayor, but candidates in cities themselves. But I think we mustn't lose track of the policy formulation that Unite for Change wants to put forward. Policy formulation that says, I think about Joburg. Is it still the city of gold? It can't be. You know, gold was discovered so long ago. Now we got to think about the change. What are the new economies? It's the same as mine. I hope you would have picked up right throughout this conversation. I am obsessed about the future. I am obsessed about thinking about alternatives. Cape Town can benefit from its own tourism economy. That's but one component. It must be better at being at the forefront of leading the AI conversation. How does Cape Town become safer? All of these questions are about reform. I was with the Minister of Basic Education yesterday, even having a big debate about whether the federalization of funding makes sense. And so all of these reform, we must be part of a generation of leaders that say 31 years of democracy, 30 years of constitutionalism, how do we play the second half different to what we've had in the first half, and what changes we bring? Because if we continue to do what we have been doing, we will get what we've always got, and what we've always got isn't good enough. That's the nub of this issue. And so even the political infrastructure needs reform. All of it needs, and we must look at that, because we must shape a new identity of South Africa that isn't only rooted in apartheid.
I was going to say this a little earlier in the demographics conversation.
Correct. Because at this point in time, even some of the politics or the political parties define themselves in relation to apartheid. Now, apartheid was, of course, a monumental crime against humanity.
Absolutely agreed.
Now we've got to say to ourselves, in the next 31 years, what will be the identity of a South African going forward? Imagine. So if you go to Singapore, for argument's sake, you know, I've had history with Singapore thanks to a number of tweets, but the point is, when you think about Singapore, you define it as the modern economic hub. You don't define it as a nation that, you know, had gone through all the issues that it has gone through.
It had nothing at one point.
If you go to Kigali, I was in Kigali last month, Rwanda, you can define it as a country of genocide, or you can describe it as probably one of the most forward-looking countries in the continent.
Cleaner streets.
If you go, so what is that second half story for South Africa? We can either define it as a country that still battles with the legacy of apartheid, or we could say, could this country be the future of innovation? Could this country be the future of an education system that empowers our young people? Could this be one of the safest countries? So let me put this challenge when I wrap it up. This is my challenge. There are only 3 questions we must answer. 1, if there are 18 million grant recipients, how do we move 10 million of them into the middle class? That's the question. Forget everything else. Everything else is a sideshow. That's the question. The second is, who's going to govern to achieve that? And thirdly, what do we do globally in relation to Africa and the globe? Could we grow our GDP from where it sits at the moment of just over 7 trillion rand to maybe $1 trillion US, which would be about 16 trillion rands? Can we set that as an ambitious task? And so everything that we do must focus on that.
Yeah.
And if we go that route, I would argue one day it will be said, South Africa, a nation post-apartheid, that's a $1 trillion US economy, puts it close to countries like Japan and many others, then we've won.
Are you ready to play? This is called Roby's Round Robin. It's 5 questions. I'm going to put it to you.
Have a go, yeah.
Favorite movie of all time?
Top of mind maybe is Notting Hill, because I think it's so hilarious and silly, and I love watching it from time to time. It's good fun.
Great. Favorite artist? It can be a painter or a musician.
Favorite artist? My gosh. I listen to so many, but maybe favorite author, maybe is probably someone like Dallas Willard, who's one of the philosophers and writes so much. Artists, I listen to so many different ones. I'll come back to that now.
Favorite political sparring partner, alive or dead, in the context of South Africa of all time for Mmusi Maimane?
I loved sparring with Jacob Zuma. I thought it was hilarious sparring with President Zuma.
Nkandla.
we've had many of our battles. So he is one. I've certainly enjoyed sparring with him.
But your favorite politician alive today, currently working? you can only choose one?
Currently working.
Not your deputy, no?
You mean in South Africa?
Yeah.
In South Africa, there's Umam Kaula, who is in the EFF. She's a granny, but I love how she's able to just put language for people in the most simplistic ways. I love Mamu Kaula. She's one of my favorite. I don't agree with what the EFF says half the time, but I just love her. She's a darling, and she's a special human being, and she's great. I love hanging out with her. I love when she speaks in Parliament, because when she speaks, I sort of think that because South Africa's duality of politics, you hear from this highbrow elite at times, and you forget that the majority of citizens actually live below the upper poverty line and actually want to hear their public representatives speak in the most simplest ways.
And lastly, the idiom or the motto that you live by. When you wake up every morning, I know you're a deeply religious person.
Yeah. I mean, whatever I do, may it always bring glory to God, and ultimately, just never quit. No, it's what I tell my kids. If you were to phone my daughter right now, say, what does daddy do? I think all of them would argue the case that we try and we'll try and leave this place better than we found it. And it's organized us as a family. It's given us a sense of mission. It's allowed us to go through difficult times because they are difficult in politics. But it's also allowed us, when I'm away from home, for my kids to not feel like I'm an absent father in that sense, but for them to feel like it's their sacrifice and their contribution to this country.
Nkosi kakhulu, ngiyabonga, kuyalabonga, danko. I really appreciate you being on the lead. Iba imnini amnande.
Now about ndiyabulela inkosi.
And do you have any questions for the president?
I do.
Let's get to it. Cheers.
You're listening to The Lead on News 24 with your host, broadcast journalist Graham Robenheimer.
Ending off with an answer to Roby's pointless braai quiz, and I asked at the beginning of the show, who's the ANC NEC member been wrapped over the knuckles by the party this week for handing out loaves of bread to people in Pretoria this election season? And the answer is ANC NEC member Bernice Swartz, name and shame. Now, pictures later sprang up showing Swartz arriving in a black luxury vehicle and then proceeding to hand out single loaves of bread to residents in Marabastad, Pretoria. Some of those residents included children. Now, as our political journalist Soyiso Maliti reports, ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula has since wrapped Swartz over the knuckles in a private letter and has since called her one loaf per family bread campaign a quote-unquote insult to the indigent. I mean, this is clearly vote buying, desperate at that. Well, if it's only early March and elections are supposed to be held between November and January next year, oh my goodness, this is going to be one interesting election season to watch. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Mmusi Maimane. Of course, look out over the next couple of weeks or so as we move to those elections. You'll have more newsmakers on the lead every Thursday. So if you have any requests, send them our way and we'll make sure that we'll profile and grill them right here on News 24's flagship podcast. My name's Graham Robenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have the lead.